Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo, your host. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. It's another Thursday and we've got another show. We're going to start, as we often do, as we always do, with news, federal, state, and local, particularly related to COVID, but certainly not limited. And then we're going to go to an interview. I've got a great interview today with Dave Cavell, candidate for the congressional 4th District of Massachusetts. One of many candidates, of course. Dave is a Brookline native, and it's a great interview, so I hope you'll stay tuned for it. But first, as always, we want to run through the news. The first item is I want to talk a little bit about the COVID numbers in Massachusetts. We know that outside of New England, New York, and New Jersey, the numbers are getting much, much worse. Far worse than what we're seeing here in our part of the country right now. In Massachusetts, we're actually getting slightly mixed signals. Thankfully, deaths attributed to COVID are declining. Their 7-day average is down to about 10 per day, and that's been a slow, steady decline. On the other hand, the number of people being diagnosed with a new COVID infection each day and the number of people total in the hospital each day is actually slightly increasing each day over the past few weeks. So we've got multiple signals in different directions. What do we do about it? Here's what I do. I keep distanced. I'm working from home as much as I can. I'm shopping from home when I need to shop. When I do go outside, I'm wearing a mask every time, the entire time. I'm also doing a really good job washing my hands. These are the things we've got to do, and the better job we do, the better chance we have of turning this around, particularly as school is getting set to begin both for the college students and, of course, for K-12. Cocktails to Go was signed into law by the governor within the last week. The idea is that restaurants can not just sell beer and wine for takeout or for delivery, they can also do mixed drinks. They've got to be sealed. And look, if you're in Brookline and you carry out a cocktail to go or beer or wine and you're walking home, you can't have a sip until you get home, right? Let's be careful about this. Let's not take an opportunity for economic stimulus and for fun and ruin it for everyone. So sorry to be the scold on that one. The Senate passed and the House is currently deliberating police reform. The bills are not exactly the same, but they are quite similar. And they really go at the 4 components of the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus's 10-point plan, or 10 items that are related to state government. Details to come, but they will come soon. It's not yet clear if the governor will sign or if the legislature will need to override a veto. Earlier this week, the Attorney General rejected Brookline's Warrant Article 21. To remind you, a little over a year ago, Brookline Town Meeting passed a bylaw that said that if you're doing major construction, new or renovation, you can't install new fossil fuel piping in your home or your business or your school or any other building. And what that would have done was not allowed people to use oil or natural gas to heat their space. If it was a smaller building like a house, would not be allowed to use fossil fuel to heat their domestic water for showers and for cooking and so forth. It would have permitted fossil fuel use of heating for large water heating systems like hotels or apartment buildings, because it's just technically very difficult to do that in a cost-effective way with electric at the moment. It also would have permitted gas for cooktops and other kitchen work. And the Attorney General ruled that it was a great idea, but it violates state law in a couple of different places and therefore cannot be allowed to go into effect. And so now really it's up to the legislature. It's up to your senators, including Senator Cindy Cream, and your representatives, including me, Tommy Vitolo, to get that right. And I've already begun having conversations with my colleagues and House leadership about how we might do that. If you have any ideas about this or anything else, I'm going to interrupt right now because we always put it up on the screen. Call me or email me, 617-872-8921. tommy.vitolo@mahouse.gov. Always happy to hear from you about COVID, about Warrant Article 21, about anything else. If I can be of help to you, let me know. If you've got an idea, I want to hear it. Continuing on, lastly, the select board this week voted to set up two committees related to policing in Brookline. One is a committee to reimagine policing in Brookline. The other is a committee to reform policing in Brookline. If you're interested in one or the other, you should call the select board at 617-730-2211. Again, that's 617-730-2211. If you're interested in the Reimagining Policing in Brookline committee or the Reforming Policing in Brookline committee. That's your updates on government for the week. We're going to go right now to my interview recorded just earlier today with Dave Cavell, candidate for Congress in the Massachusetts 4th District. Thanks for watching Brookline Interactive Group. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to another edition of TV on TV. Today, our guest is Dave Cavell from Brookline, candidate for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District and longtime friend of mine. We're going to dive right in. We've only got 25 minutes here on Brookline Interactive Group Television. So much we want to talk about. Dave, welcome for the show. The first question is always the same. What have you been doing between birth and 2019?
Well, Tommy, it is a pleasure to be here. It is a pleasure to see you, even at a safe social distance. Thank you so much for having me on. As you said, yes, I'm Dave Cavell, born and raised right here in North Brookline, near the Brookline Arts Center. And you know I've spent most of my life in Brookline, Tommy, because you've been there, frankly, for most of it. So yes, I grew up attending Temple Israel and playing Brookline youth soccer and sleeping through some town meetings because my mother, Kathleen Cavell, was in town meeting and would take me there on some school nights. She and my father, Stanley Cavell, raised me to care about public service and community. And so, she had started a group when I was in high school called Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts. And my father, when he was a professor, had gone down to Mississippi in 1964 during the Freedom Summer. And so that's why, for college, I left Brookline. I went all the way to Somerville and went to Tufts. But when I met my wife there, by the way, but when I left, I decided to go into public service. I decided to be a teacher. And so I ended up in the South Bronx in New York, teaching 32 students, fourth graders. And my first day, Tommy, there were 29 desks and 32 students. So as you can imagine, that meant 3 of them were sitting on the carpet. I had a student who would come into class, put his head down on his desk, and fall asleep every morning. And I was after him saying, I'm not the most exciting teacher you've ever had, but how can we get you to stay awake? What's going on? And then finally, he let me walk him home. And I discovered why he was falling asleep. It was because he was homeless, and he and his father were sleeping outside every night. And I thought that was wrong, that in the United States of America, I would have students who were homeless, 25 minutes from Times Square. So I went into government. And that's when I started working for Deval Patrick in the State House for 3 years. That's when I went to law school and then ended up working as a speechwriter for the Obamas in the White House for the last 2 years. And, Tommy, it struck me on the morning after the Trump election, you can actually see in this beautiful book of photographs that Pete Souza took of the administration, you can actually flip to one of the saddest photos in this big book and find me. I'm in the Oval Office the morning after the Trump election in 2016. And what President Obama is saying there is, if you care about this work, I was only going to be president for 8 years. Tell me what you're going to do about it. And so, to answer that question, I decided to stay in government and public service. So 2 weeks after I left the White House, I was suing the White House because I was Maura Healey's senior advisor and assistant attorney general and spent 2.5 years in that office, doing everything that we were doing in that office, taking on the Trump administration, investigating ExxonMobil, beating the NRA in court, Purdue Pharma, you name it. And that led us to this race for the 4th congressional seat, and hopefully to serving as a member of Congress from this district for many years to come.
So I want to poke at that just a little bit more. You're working in public service for 10 years, working directly for, frankly, incredibly popular big name Democratic elected officials and doing great work in a supporting role. And after Congressman Kennedy announced he would not be seeking re-election, very soon thereafter, you decided to stay in government to continue trying to help people, but in a very different way. You wanted to be the elected. Tell us about how it came to be, how you came to decide that the right place for you was as an elected official rather than in a supportive role like you had been in the prior decade.
Yeah. Well, look, obviously, the world has changed quite a bit since last fall, Tommy. Things have changed for a lot of people, but I don't think that the issues have changed. And in fact, I think for the most part, they've just been underscored and their urgency has been increased. I felt like last fall we were already at a moment of crisis in this country, that our democracy had been under assault for decades, and that we needed people in this work who didn't just sort of want to have these jobs, but wanted to do these jobs and knew how to do these jobs and had been on the front lines of every single issue that we would have to confront as a member of Congress. And so, when I sat down and talked to my wife about whether I would run for this seat, we started talking about all that, about how, I'd actually worked for a good president and seen how members of Congress could make real change for their district. And I'd stood up to a bad president and helped stop his worst abuses, and investigated ExxonMobil and Purdue Pharma and stood up to the NRA. That these issues weren't theoretical. And then we also talked about our student loan debt and how expensive it was to run for Congress. But then we agreed that those were actually reasons to run for Congress, because I thought we needed more members of Congress for whom this was personal, that we were bankrupting a generation, and that we were not investing in the things that we needed in this country. Now, more generally, I think we need a proven progressive. I think we need somebody who will actually help pass a Green New Deal and Medicare for all and gun violence and tackle the opioid epidemic and help overturn Citizens United. Somebody who doesn't just agree with us on those issues, Tommy, but is ready to get them done. And so, this question is often phrased to me as, why should we vote for you instead of anybody else who's running? And the first thing I say is, well, you shouldn't have to vote for just me, because we should have ranked choice voting so that nobody can win with 20% of the vote in this primary. But the second thing is, I do think that experience and that background and that insight matters. And I think so too does the ability to explain not just the whats of what we want to do, but the whys. Why do we want to do this? Why is this good for the 4th District? Why is this good for the country? And a lot of folks in Brookline agree. The chair of the Brookline Select Board, Bernard Green, supports me for this reason. The most recent chair, Neil Wyshynski, Nancy Heller, also on the Select Board, State Representative Mike Moran, progressive leaders like Chobe Hoy and Reggie Healy and Novel, and so many more. And I think that that's because they know there's really one of us in this race that is ready on day one to confront one of the greatest crises in our history and hopefully turn it into a moment of opportunity to do big, important things that we've needed to do for a long time.
So I want to get into some specific issues. You mentioned you got experience as a school teacher. My son Felice is rising 4th grader. My daughter Angelina is going to enter kindergarten, both at the Pierce School or maybe not at the Pierce School. So walk us through your thoughts about what public education looks like this fall and how we navigate our public health needs with the educational and, frankly, mental and physical health needs of our children.
So, Tommy, I have to say it does make me feel old when you now talk about the age of your children, because I distinctly remember them being.
Me too. Makes me also feel old.
Good. Okay, that makes two of us. But yes, look, you're right. I'm the only person in this race who used to teach in a public school classroom, and I think that's why, if you go to my website, to davecavell.com, what you see there is the most comprehensive education plan in the race. It's called the Horace Mann Plan for Education. And it begins with this question about, during COVID, what do we do? How do we fund our schools? How do we keep students safe? And how do we make sure that, for students like, your son, you get one chance to go to fourth grade. And so we've got to make that count. So the plan starts by recognizing that the most vulnerable students right now, in my view, are the students who were the most vulnerable before this crisis. They were students who didn't speak English as a first language at home, low-income students, students in immigrant communities, students who learn differently than their peers. And these are the students that I think are most at risk, frankly. So this is why, we call for a whole bunch of things, getting more, high-speed internet everywhere, making sure that students have connected devices. Frankly, I thought it was disgraceful that Mitch McConnell's response when states were talking about funding issues was to tell states to go bankrupt. I think that Congress needs to step in and get emergency aid for education to school districts because, look, Tommy, I've been across the district. I was at a teacher protest on Taunton Green in Taunton a couple of weeks ago. They're about to lay off 150 teachers. And that's the same story in cities and towns throughout the district. And I don't have to tell you, Tommy, that Chapter 70 funding doesn't just magically appear. When we're talking about funding our school systems in the midst of a pandemic, this is where Congress needs to step in and make sure we're not balancing budgets on the backs of students and teachers. But I also think that more generally, our reopening plans here need to be driven by facts. They need to be driven by science. They need to be driven by experts. And they need to be developed together. I was really disappointed to learn that very few parents had been consulted by their school districts throughout this summer, throughout the 4th District when we were considering reopening plans. Very few educators and teacher groups had been brought in by the Baker administration to sit at the table and figure out how are we going to do this and what do students need to be safe? What do teachers need to be safe? How do we make sure we do this the right way? Because, I don't have to tell you that for a lot of low-income families in particular, this is essential. This is their childcare, and especially for younger students. These days in school are absolutely essential, and there's no replacement for them. So whatever we do has to be driven by science, but it's got to recognize we have to reopen here, right? I mean, this is going to be a real problem if we try to reopen, don't do it right, and then have to shut things right back down. We can't accept that. And on top of that, Tommy, I'll just note that I think we need to hear a lot more about the plans to keep our communities safe when we're welcoming back thousands of college students to this state in a few short weeks. I mean, it's great that we've got so many college and university campuses in Massachusetts. It's great that we're known as a place of higher education. But what about the students that are coming back from places that are having virus outbreaks right now? What is the comprehensive plan? Not a multi-campus strategy like the 50-state strategy in responding to this virus. What is the comprehensive plan to make sure that the 4th Congressional District and the rest of Massachusetts can welcome these students back in a safe way? That's what we need to focus on.
If it's all right with you, I'd like to stay on COVID, but you and I, we're known for getting stuff done, so we're going to do a couple of things at once. I would like you to sort of talk a little more about COVID, perhaps outside of education more broadly, maybe over the next 6 months, maybe over the year after that, when Massachusetts has a new congressperson representing the 4th. And I also would like you to talk about how it intersects with equity and Black Lives Matter. And really, I'm not saying these are two sides of the same coin, but I know these tensions and the approaches done well will be interrelated. So walk us through your thoughts on what the federal government ought to be doing to move us forward on these two issues that exist separately, but are coexisting right now in a very real way.
Yeah, well, Tommy, I want to begin where you left off, which is that these crises that you're talking about are intersectional, exactly as you say. And what that means is that they're interrelated. It should not surprise us that the communities that have been hit hardest during the COVID pandemic are typically communities of color and immigrant communities, and the same communities that have been experiencing systemic racism in America for 400 years. And this is the consequence of a country that did not always recognize or act like Black Lives Matter, and they do. So I want to start there by saying, in the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many more, our our challenge is, our responsibility is to confront that, to figure out what does it look like to finally start acting like Black Lives Matter. So I've called for a whole bunch of things on the website. That begins with reimagining policing. I do think that we have to start there by banning chokeholds, by ending militarization programs, qualified immunity, instituting independent oversight and accountability. Really asking ourselves the question: what are we asking police officers to do in this country, and why? Should we be asking police officers to be social workers? Should we be asking them to? Police officers themselves have told me that doesn't make sense. That they've never been trained to do that, and that when people need help on the opioid crisis, for example, they do want them to have resources and counselors and social workers at their disposal, not necessarily a police officer, because this is ultimately a disease that needs to be treated, in my view, when it comes to the opioid crisis. And mental health is another component of this as well. But to that point, though, it's not just about policing. We need to reimagine this whole country. And you brought up some of the things we're going to need to do to recover from this COVID pandemic. One of those, I think, is the climate crisis and addressing it. I just wrote a piece in Commonwealth Magazine about this, Tommy, and you're certainly no stranger to the climate crisis issue and the work that we have to do in the clean energy space. I know that this has been your work for a long time, but in my view, somebody asked me recently, a young student in Easton asked me, during the COVID pandemic, are we going to lose our sight on the climate crisis? And my answer was, we can't. This is the moment to invest in the climate crisis. And again, it's intersectional. And I think it recognizes, first and foremost, that there is no justice without climate justice. Half of my students in the South Bronx had asthma because of the high rates of air pollutants in that community. And we've seen that play out in lots of communities here in Massachusetts and elsewhere across the country. But also, when we talk about headed toward 25% unemployment in a place like Fall River and 20% elsewhere in the 4th Congressional District, well, I think one of the best solutions is to invest in a clean energy future. Because, I don't have to tell you, there are 50,000 coal jobs left in this whole country total. And there's 110,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts alone. So to my mind, that says, let's pass the Green New Deal. Let's finish South Coast Rail. Let's make Fall River the leader in Atlantic offshore wind. Let's invest in tuition-free public colleges and universities. And let's make sure that we are putting people back to work, decarbonizing this economy, and investing in the jobs of the future. I think that is the best way for us to respond.
Thank you, David. You mentioned in your answer a wide variety of places throughout the 4th Congressional District, which many of our viewers know, but many may not realize. One end is in Brookline, the other end is in Fall River, with some beautiful communities in between. And I know you've been all around the district. So tell us a little bit about this big district of ours and what it means, or what it would mean to represent a district with the variety that the 4th Congressional District has.
Well, you're right. The 4th Congressional District is big and diverse, and you're right. It goes from Brookline to Fall River. It goes, west to Milford and east to Easton. It is an incredible district that deserves a representative who represents all of it, in my view. So that's why, since day one, when I launched my website, I was the only one in the race to have a website that was not just in English, but was fully translated by human beings fluent in these languages into Spanish and Portuguese, because 20% of students in Fall River speak Spanish or Portuguese as a first language at home. And my view is, if you're not even talking to everybody in the district, how can you hope to represent them? So that was the first commitment we made. Another one that we've made and called on my co-candidates to commit to as well is what we call traveling offices. So I saw this in the Attorney General's office, which sees itself as the people's law firm, which means you take your services on the road and to people instead of just always asking people to come to you. So instead of just having 2 district offices here, one in Attleboro and one in Newton, I think we actually need to bring the services and resources of the office into communities. So a couple times a month, we're going to rent out office space in city and town halls across the district, and we're going to come to you. We're going to bring the staff of the office. I'll be there. We're going to bring resources, and we're going to make sure that we can actually serve you in your community without you having to come all the way to us. And I think that that's a really important commitment to make, Tommy. I think serving people and representing them, there's a reason the job is called representative. And I think that needs to be the first and foremost concern of anybody serving in that role.
This race has been active for almost a year now, right? The conversations were starting in late September, early October 2019, and certainly no one I know saw COVID coming or saw the tremendous positive unrest associated with Black Lives Matter, but you knew it was going to be a long road. And in this part of the world, at least, long roads are expensive roads. So I'd like you to just sort of help us see sort of what the money in politics in the 4th congressional district looks like in terms of what fundraising looks like. Some candidates have self-funded a little. Some candidates have self-funded a lot. Some candidates have frankly had to walk away or put careers on hold to take a stab at this, and that has its own personal costs, right? So walk us through what the money looks like in this race and how you think that matters.
Well, I think you've brought up something that's really important, not just in the 4th congressional district race, but in politics generally. And that is that money is part of what is wrong with politics, and that seats cannot be for sale to the highest bidder. That does not result in elections that I think we can be proud of, or necessarily the best representatives for folks in the district. And I think we deserve better. And this is why I support getting dark money out of politics. And this is why I support overturning Citizens United. And this is why I would support even public financing of elections. Because, look, outside money in this race can drown out the rest of the district, and can keep the sort of wealthiest donors at the forefront of every conversation, because they can, really make sure that their influence is heard loudest. And this is why I was the first person in the race to call for no super PAC spending in this race, and no outside dark money coming in to influence this election. I think, we can't, if we're going to stand up to Donald Trump, we should not run campaigns like him. So I think that's a commitment that I really hope and expect all of the fellow candidates in this race to make as well. And Tommy, you pointed this out. I am somebody that had to leave my career in the Attorney General's office, and it does have a fair amount of student loan debt. I don't think it should cost $1 million effectively to run for Congress in this country, but it basically does. But here's the good news, is that yes, there are some people who have very wealthy donors who are supporting them, and this, that, and the other. And I'm very proud of the donors that we do have, and I'm very proud of the amount that we've raised. But the truth is, money is not what wins elections. I have worked for 3 people, Deval Patrick, Barack Obama, and Maura Healey, all of whom were told that they were not going to win their race because they weren't going to have enough. They weren't going to have the most money in the race, and therefore they couldn't win. And as we know, that turned out not to be the case. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is still go everywhere and talk to everyone about everything. And I think that's a commitment that everyone should make. And recognize that, money cannot determine this election. The voters in the 4th district have to do that. And so we need a system that reflects that. But in the meantime, where my money is not coming from, Tommy. It is not coming from corporate PACs. It is not coming from police unions. It is not coming from fossil fuel executives or companies. It is coming from over 1,000 people who believe in a better future for the 4th district. And that's a commitment you can count on.
Dave, we've only got a few minutes left, so I am going to remind folks the election is September 1st. Polls will be open. You can go vote in person. You can also vote by mail. So I want you to really keep your eyes open for this. It's the postcard. All you got to do is open it up, check and make sure your information is correct. Put that check mark on it, sign it, drop it in the mail. It's postage paid. The ballot will come to you. You fill out your ballot, you send it back, you're a proud American. And then you repeat for November 3rd, right? It's a twofer. So important, whoever you're voting for. Dave, I want to give you one more minute. What do we miss? What's on your mind? What are some things we should leave with?
Well, the first thing is thank you, Tommy, for having me on and for highlighting this race. The second is I think this is a moment for big, bold, progressive ideas. One we didn't even get to is what I call the George Floyd Education Act. You talked earlier about our fight against systemic racism in America and to recognize that Black lives matter. I think Black history matters too. And I think one of the things we need to do to respond is make sure that every student in this country learns about our real history. So I put forward this proposal with a former colleague of mine that would bring a bunch of folks together from Facing History and Ourselves to the NAACP, the Obama Foundation, and others to figure out what do we teach, when do we teach it, and how do we teach it. I think that's a bold idea, but it's also an important idea. We can't change our past, but we can learn from it, and we have to. But more generally, as you mentioned, the race is September 1st. We need to make sure every single person has their voice heard and votes for somebody who is ready on day one to step into the federal government in the midst of one of the greatest crises of our lifetime. And I am. So please go to davecavell.com, CAVELL.com, connect with us there. You can also connect with us on Facebook at Cavell, the number 4 Congress. I cook dinner with my wife on Fridays, on Shabbats every week. Come join us. We're on Instagram. I'm on Twitter at David F. Cavell. And most of all, I would just be so honored to earn your support in this race and to get to work on behalf of the 4th Congressional District, because I don't think we have any time to waste.
Dave, thanks so much for taking the time with me today. And thank you, viewers, for watching Brookline Interactive Group. I'm Tommy Vitolo. We're doing this every week. Plenty of candidates to choose from. I have no doubt you'll find one that's right for you. And until we see each other again, have a great one.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone.